500 years of history to tell. Trees are such wonderful things. Many of them outlive us, whether they're the ancient oaks, the beeches and the hornbeams in Epping Forest, whether they're the great plane trees in our streets, or the fruit trees in our gardens. Actually, this year, my 100-year-old apple tree in my back garden just sadly split open and died, but it had seen through several generations of people in this house, which is a 100-year-old house. Mulberry trees can attain a great age. The oldest one in Britain dates back to the 1500s. And the mulberry trees that I'm going to show you this evening are between 200 and 300 years old. The amazing thing is that as living plants, they continue to give fruit every year. And that's for successive generations of people. First, we're going to look at the mulberry tree at Leytonstone House. Here it is. This photograph shows the veteran mulberry tree situated at the side of Leytonstone House. I guess most of you will know it's a grand Georgian building at the top of Leytonstone High Road, set back from the Green Man roundabout. It's one of the most accessible, easily accessible local mulberries to go and see. You can approach it either from the steps down from the pavement that skirts the roundabout, or by walking through that alleyway at the side of Tesco's. It's all publicly accessible. Look at this mulberry though, it's in what's called the horizontal phase of its life. Basically, as it gets older, this tree, the mulberry tree, just lays down some of its branches on the ground and grows horizontally, sometimes rooting down at the same time. The second tree we're going to be looking at during the course of this talk is a spectacular example, not far away from this spot, and it's on the Wanstead golf course, over in the Wanstead parklands. Here it is. It's actually situated at hole number 7 of the Wanstead golf course, and they call this hole number 7 the mulberry in its honour. And this tree has been very carefully looked after by the Wanstead Golf Club people, whose permission I had to visit the tree and study it. The downside of the tree being in this location, though, is that only people who are connected with a private golf club can actually go and see it, other than making a private arrangement. So it's quite a secret one. The two mulberries, as I've said, are not far from each other. And I now want us to look at a map that shows that. The map we're going to see is the one from a website called moruslondinium.org. Morus is the Latin name for mulberry, Londinium, London. So it's the website of the mulberries of London. And they've got a map that shows all of the mulberry trees right the way across London and beyond. But we're going to have a look at the ones that are in our part that we're looking at tonight. On this map, the mulberries are indicated by the green pinned circles. And the coverage of this section that I've chosen is the Leytonstone and Wanstead border. You can see the A12 snaking across the top left-hand corner there under the oval-shaped Green Man roundabout. The right-hand side of the map is largely taken up by the green of Wanstead parklands with its ornamental lakes. Please make a mental note of that water feature in the centre there, the basin, the hexagonal shaped water feature. We'll go back to looking at that a couple of times later on. The Leytonstone House mulberry is labelled at the top left-hand corner, and the Wanstead mulberry is towards the right at the bottom there. And I've put in pink script the labels that show you that. if you actually do visit the morrislondinium.org website, you can click on these green circles and the detail will come up that shows you exactly where the mulberry tree is located. And you can see here that we've got 3 other mulberries besides the 2 that we're focusing on, so that there are other mulberries in the area. So these are the mulberries, but what about history? That's what we're interested in this evening. And I thought I'd start off by saying that you may know there's a new film out on YouTube, and it's made by Marcus Shepherd, and it has the title Take the High Road. It's a film about Leytonstone High Road. And in it, this is a slide actually from a clip from the film itself. The most interesting bit for our story is the high road being the main highway connecting London with East Anglia, and having done so for centuries. Beginning in post-medieval times, grand houses along Leytonstone High Road were put up by wealthy merchants and bankers in the City of London, from the City of London. For them, it was a day's horse ride up to Leytonstone. The location also suited families such as the Buxtons, and maybe you will know of the connection, but I'm going to talk about it later anyway. The Buxtons, they were resident at Leytonstone House from the 19th century, and they were involved in business and politics, but they also had their country seat in East Anglia. It was at Northreps near Cromer. So stagecoaches, I can imagine stagecoaches carrying members of the Buxton family and other families, and that would have been the famous Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton, the elder, known because of his activities in campaigning against the slave trade. He, on stagecoaches, he would have been passing Leytonstone High Road on the way between London and Cromer. I actually think he would have stopped there. It would have been a stage on that journey, quite logically, after a day's ride up from the city. In making this film, Marcus Shepherd asked me where I had dug out the information about the Leytonstone mulberry that is mentioned in my book, Unraveling the Yarn, and that's the one that David mentioned in his introduction to me about Zoe Hart-Dyke and her silk activities. Well, I showed him 2 books that contain the diaries and sketches of a young member of the Buxton family, name of Ellen Buxton, and that had been kept by Ellen during the years 1860 to 64. These are the books, and I showed them to Marcus Shepherd, the filmmaker, and he's actually put this clip in his film, so I've just borrowed it, and he's very pleased for me to do that. On page 58 of the red book on the right there, there's a reproduction of Ellen Buxton's drawing of that mulberry tree at Leytonstone House, and we're going to see it on the next slide. Here it is. So Ellen, who is a 16-year-old daughter of Thomas Fowell Buxton, she's captioned this drawing of the mulberry tree as Leytonstone 1864, and we can also see, just faintly, depending on the size of your screen, that she identifies her several younger siblings by name in her own handwriting. And the diary note, which is printed in the book, reads, "We have a great many mulberries this year, which are very nice. The boys climb up to the top of the tree and throw the ripe ones down to us." So there's this wonderful picture of the children, the younger Buxton children, all having great fun in the summer around the mulberry tree. And the picture just seems incredible to me because it shows the mulberry tree which we've seen outside Leytonstone House in reality, but it shows it here in a diagram already mature and starting to lean over. This is a clear indication of its age. Dr. Peter Coles, who's a mulberry expert, and he actually runs the Morris Londinium website, he thank you. He visited the tree and he saw Ellen's drawings, and he estimated that this tree would have been planted around 1800. In trying to substantiate that, I started looking at the history of Leytonstone House itself and who lived there. The Buxtons came to live at Leytonstone House in 1840. And at the time of Ellen's birth there in 1848, this tree would already have been quite mature. So I needed to look back further. But just to satisfy ourselves that we're talking about the same tree, let's have a look at the images side by side.
Claire?
Yes?
I'm not seeing your screen, your PowerPoint.
Aha. Well, a few minutes ago, it came up that I was muted, but it wasn't me who did that. So I don't know why that's happening.
Claire, I've got your screen okay, but what I suggest you do is come out of screen sharing and then go back in.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll now go back to sharing screen. Sorry about this. It's happening beyond our powers. There we are. And let's see if it will work again. Yes, hopefully. Does that show you my next screen, which is the side-by-side view of the Leytonstone House mulberry tree as depicted in the drawing of 1864 and a photograph of 2019, and they're taken from the same angle. You have a look at the tree, both the drawings. You can see how the main branch on the tree's left side in the contemporary photograph has now descended to the ground. As we've said, it's horizontal. Whereas in 1864, that branch was still holding up, although a bit perilously, I think, for the children concerned. And then the bough on the right side of the tree in the photograph has so far continued to keep up a bit, as seen in Ellen's sketch on the left-hand side drawing. So, as I've said, the amazing thing to me is that the tree has continued to yield mulberry fruits for all of those years. And like the Buxton children, I've actually picked some myself. Let's have a look at Leytonstone House itself. On the left-hand picture is the view of the house if you're seeing it from the Green Man roundabout. The right-hand photograph shows the aspect you would see if you went up to it from the Tesco end, from the back. And I'm just musing really, if you know the Waterhouse, which is the William Morris Gallery in Forest Road, you might recall that the curved aspect of the Waterhouse is shown as the front, whereas the flat aspect is the back there. And I've no idea architecturally why that is the case, that these two buildings of similar date, I think 1762 was the Waterhouse. I've no idea why they have the curved part at the front and the other one has the flat part at the front. But anyway, that's just amusing. Let's have a look at the history of Leytonstone House. There are two plaques which you might have seen if you've been there. On the left-hand picture is the council's blue plaque, and it reads 18th century house, originally the home of Sir Edward North Buxton. From 1868 to 1936 was the Bethnal Green Union School for the juvenile poor. The right-hand plaque, much earlier, it was erected, interestingly, by the women's section of the Borough of Leyton Ratepayers Association. They put it up in 1930, and it reads, in this house, 1840 to 1867, resided Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton and Edward North Buxton, who took a prominent part in the preservation of Epping Forest for the use of the people. While the details may differ between these two, I think these two plaques together display what is popularly known about in respect of the Buxtons and Leytonstone House. Peter Ashen, the local historian and activist, has also written very recently about Leytonstone House in his book Freedom Walk. And here's the book on the left-hand side of this slide. His book is subtitled The Roots of Diversity in Waltham Forest, and it covers Chingford, Walthamstow and Leyton, as well as the leading chapter on Leytonstone. Peter tells us, Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton, 1786 to 1845, was born in Essex. He became a brewer by joining the Quaker firm of Truman, Hanbury and Co. in 1808. He was an MP, a philanthropist, and an anti-slavery campaigner. He had 8 children. He married Hannah Gurney, whose family included Elizabeth Fry, the prison reformer, and they were Quakers. Although he never lived within the borough, his 2 sons certainly did. So it's possible he would have lived in the area, visited the area. The image on the right shows one of Peter's freedom walks, the one that I was myself was very pleased to join back in 2019. And here we're at St John the Baptist Churchyard in Leytonstone, hearing Peter reveal the history of those buried here, including members of the Buxton family. So already having been interested in the mulberry tree at Leytonstone House, I was intrigued by Peter's talk and I decided to dig further. To my surprise, when I started doing the research, the following portrait popped up on an internet search. Through this portrait in the Tate popping up on an internet search, I found that the portrait subject, Philip Sansom, you can see there 1746 to 1815, his dates, he had been an early resident at Leytonstone House, and that he was also involved in the early campaign to abolish the slave trade. He was 40 years older than Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton, the elder, the one called the Liberator by his family, the Buxton family. And Sansom may have been valuable to the anti-slave trade campaign in his capacity, I think, as a banker and a merchant. I've mentioned to David Boot that there is further interesting detail about Philip Sansom's career, which I might try to gather up for a future short article. Certainly of interest to mention now is that Philip Sansom was one of the 3 Anglicans who formed the 1787 Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade. Its 9 other members otherwise being Quakers. Now, you may know that in those days, Quakers were prevented by law from taking part in political and public life. So on a committee such as this, there had to be people who were not Quakers involved, and Sansom was one of them. As we've heard, Peter Ashen has picked up on the Quaker connection of the Buxtons through their marriage to the Gurney family. So it seemed to me the idea of North Leytonstone as a hub of what you might say Quaker sympathizing progressive business people of the time and politicians throws an interesting slant on further research directions. Peter also writes about the Barclays in this respect, and young Ellen Buxton, who did all the drawings, she was 16 then, she went on to marry Robert Barclay, who was part of the family that then established the bank. So why did Sansom get involved? How well did he know Fal Buxton, the elder? I found some documentary evidence which may be of interest, and there's more to be investigated, but here's an example. This is an extract from the minutes of the Abolitionist Committee, the one I said that Sansom was involved in. And I saw it, I found it online from the British Library website. And this extract reveals the details of the founding meeting of 22nd of May, 1787, in which it was resolved, as you can see on the third line down in the first paragraph, they resolved that the slave trade was both impolitic and unjust. So that's their starting point, way back in 1787. And Fal Buxton was only 1 year old at that stage. We can see Philip Sansom's name here on the list. He's on the fourth line down of the second paragraph. So this is well before William Wilberforce's time as well. So there's so much to research and investigate. One thing's certain, though, Philip Sansom's grave is not to be found at St. John's in Leytonstone. He lived in the times much earlier than St. John's being built, and it's actually at St. Mary's at Leyton. Here's the vault, and the inscription on the front of it reads, "To the memory of Philip Sansom of Leytonstone House." So we can be absolutely clear here who we're talking about and where he was. Sansom's son Henry and wife Elizabeth were also buried there in that vault. Those are the Buxton family who died in Leytonstone. They were buried at St. John's in the latter half of the 19th century. So I began to wonder, can I begin to construct a timeline for Leytonstone House? And it's a bit kind of jagged and unconnected at the moment, but this is a start. So there's a biography by R.E. Davies named The Buxtons of Easney. That's the place in Norfolk where the home was. And he suggests Leytonstone House was built in 1740, but I haven't found any substantiation for that, but at least that's a starting point. Some sources suggest that wings and curved aspects at the rear were later additions, and that's be quite expected really for a building that size. The plot was within the Warwood Crown lease of land that also extended down the high road and owned by the Owsley family. And I found a note that a Mrs. Alger, and I haven't tracked her down, but that's what it says, that she had gardens in the Warwood estate. Well, I do know from documentation that Sansom acquired the lease of the Warwood farm in 1795, and he added land to the front of the property of the Leytonstone House property from the forest waste, and he became resident at Leytonstone House from that moment until 1815, which is when he died. His widow, his vault we saw, died in 1825, son in 1827, and that left daughter Elizabeth in continued residence. So there's much to research as the gap between 1827 with daughter Elizabeth perhaps being there on her own, because I don't think she married, and then the 1840 date when the Buxtons went to live there. Two branches of the family, two brothers and their families, and they stayed there till 1867. After that, they let the building go to the Bethnal Green Union for being a workhouse school and a children's home, and it remained like that until 1936. after which it became Leytonstone House Hospital, as many people might know, until 1994, when that was closed down. And since then, the house is just a commercial property, and is grade 2 listed. So that's the kind of skeleton of a timeline for Leytonstone House. Well, I'm tending to think, and I'm just going to go back to that because I wanted also to say, if I'm wondering who planted the mulberry tree, well, it could have been Mrs. Alger, who had gardens in the Warwood estate, but I do rather think it was in Philip Sansom's time. In other words, before the Buxtons, as we logically would work out from the drawings. I think Philip Sansom was a nouveau riche of Leytonstone of the time. He was the first of generation. And this could have been, you know, his way of showing that he'd made it to a substantial property, which was on the edge of Leytonstone and the forest. But whatever the tree's origins, the successive generations of occupants have taken care of the tree, and long may they continue to do so. So let's just go now to look at two more of Ellen Buxton's drawings. The one on the left says it's the front of our own house from the road, and the writing underneath is by Ellen Buxton's granddaughter, Ellen Crichton, who actually put all the drawings together and the diary notes and published them in those books that we saw earlier on, and it's from the Red Book. I just read out that first paragraph in case it's not visible to you. Ellen Buxton was the second of a large family of children living in the middle of the 19th century at Leytonstone, then outside London, by Wanstead Flats and just south of Epping Forest. They had a large Georgian house, now built round and used as a hospital, with a garden and a paddock for their ponies. Their father worked at the family brewery in Spitalfields, but they used to go for several months of the year to stay with their grandmother at Northreps near Cromer. Both there and round Leytonstone, they had innumerable cousins, the Buxtons, Gurneys, Barclays, Hawes, much intermarried, and whose background was almost entirely Quaker. 3 consecutive generations of Buxtons had married friends of the name that Quakers call themselves, though they themselves remained evangelical church people. Their life was permeated by their religion and the philanthropy arising from it. Ellen's grandfather, known in the family as the Liberator, was the leader of the campaign which led to the abolition of slavery. Her grandmother was one of the Gurneys of Earlham, a sister of Elizabeth Fry, the prison reformer. So now moving over to the right-hand drawing, this now Ellen now turns round, and it's the opposite view from the one on the left. So this one is looking out from the house, whereas the previous one was looking up to the house. And it's called View from My Window. So she's maybe looking from perhaps the first floor of Leytonstone House. And she's marked a number of locations that she can see with numbers. You can't necessarily see all of them too much, but I'm going to say what they are. She's indicated number 2, and there is, bear in mind, this is quite a long distance, a long perspective that she's foreshortened doing this. She was quite good at drawing. Number 2 is Mr. Finese's house. And I've investigated this, and I believe it could be the Blake Hall on Lake House Estate in Wanstead, that was built in 1690 and demolished in 1909. And the amazing thing is that according to the Morris Londinium map, there is a mulberry tree at the what was the Lake House Estate. So, you know, that things seem to tie together, but we'll check that out in a minute. Ellen's note number 3 marks Wanstead Park Pond, and that's likely to be the hexagonal water feature, the basin that we noted earlier on. And she says about it that there has been capital skating here. So, you know, that sounds fascinating. They would go walking down that road through to Leytonstone, that is through to Wanstead, and go skating in those days. Because, of course, they were well-off people. You know, we're not talking about the poor people of these times. Her note 4 is that construction on the right of her drawing, and it's labelled Archery House, and that was a functional archery house at the time, but now that location is in fact the Quaker meeting house and burial ground, a modern building. So interesting, isn't it? You know, another Quaker connection there. Note 5 is just a general note for saying forest. Everything else was forest, and of course that was the surroundings. So let's just have a look at the map so that we can see where we are again. I'm going back to the Morris Leginium map, not a diagram map, but an aerial view, contemporary, of course. And if we imagine that Ellen Buxton was sitting in Leytonstone House, that's green, marked by the green circle with the pink arrow from the left pointing towards it, I suggest that it's quite possible that a mulberry marked here with the yellow arrow pointing down was the one, and it's on this map it's marked as Selsdon Road, Wanstead, could have been growing in what Ellen Buxton said was Mr. Finese's garden. But let's have a look at Wanstead. Move to the right of the picture. You can see the clear open spaces of the golf course. The history of Wanstead Parklands, I think, is quite well known and documented. But what I wanted to know was, how come there is a mulberry tree in the middle of a golf course? As people may know, there was once a magnificent mansion, the Wanstead House, around which these extensive grounds were laid out. Prior to the Wanstead House, there was a post-medieval Wanstead Hall, and before that, a hunting lodge. And there's also Saxon and Roman history relating to this site. So we're talking about real history here. And my task was to search out old maps and plans to find some clues about the one mulberry tree that is there. From 1720 to 1823, this is the Wanstead house that was there. And it was a really, really grand house. It isn't there anymore, sadly. It's in the extensive grounds with the artificial lakes, including the hexagonal basin that we saw. And it was formerly part of the original estate of Richard Child, who later became the first Earl Tilney. It was one of the finest Palladian mansions in Britain. It has got 6 Corinthian columns on the portico. Sadly, it was demolished from 1823 to pay for the gambling debts of William Paul Tilney Long Wellesley, who had callously and opportunistically married the young heiress to this estate, Catherine. And I just mused to myself just how different the axis of local history might have been if the house was still standing, but of course it isn't. It was taken apart brick by brick, and everything was sold together with the treasures inside at auctions. On the plus side, the grounds remained intact, so they didn't get built over, which might have been the fate of a place like this. They've been maintained by the City of London alongside the Epping Forest under Acts of Parliament. The golf club has its lease within that since 1920. So recently I was overjoyed to find some images of relics of Wanstead House. It was on the Friends of Wanstead Parklands Facebook page. Look at this. I mean, I just thought these were absolutely outstanding. So grand was Wanstead House that it had images on ceramics, and aren't they beautiful? They show various views of the mansion and of the various parts of the gardens and the follies that were built around it. So I just love looking at these. I would like to have one, but I think they're a bit expensive. I was still puzzling though. It's not at all unusual for a mansion of this grandeur to have mulberry trees, but why was there just this one? Well, why is there just this one? And why is it on a golf course? Let's have a look at a detailed map of the time, going back a bit. This is Roke's map, which is a kind of a survey of 10 miles around London, and he did this survey in 1746. And again, look what crops up, the basin, the hexagonal water feature. That's where it was. That's what it began as in those days. Wanstead House, the actual house building, is represented by that black oblong vertical in the centre. I've outlined it in pink. Its front aspect faced westwards, over the basin, and to its south were walled kitchen gardens and orchards. And I was just really fascinated to see these marks. And I've put the gardens in blue and the orchard in green. The other really significant factor is that although Wanstead House was built from 1720 onwards, the grounds themselves had been laid out earlier by the predecessors back in the 17th century. My hypothesis began to form, therefore, that the most southerly tree on Roke's map there might have been the one mulberry that survives. But why was it left on its own? Well, I found another explanation. Sometime after Wanstead House was demolished, those kitchen gardens and orchards were moved to the eastern part of the grounds. My assumption is therefore that the tree, the mulberry tree, was already mature and perhaps leaning a bit, so the gardeners left it intact rather than try and uproot it. In my exploratory essay on this, which is published on the Morris Londinium website, I've got some other documentary evidence about that. And I think that I was suggesting that if it was already mature in 1720, then it must be getting on for 300 years old. So that was just from documentary evidence and assumptions that I was making. I was not to know when I first wrote about this in 2018, how my assumption was going to be unexpectedly supported within a couple of years. But before we explore that, let's just have a look at the scale of the Wanstead golf course and how isolated the current tree is. It's hole number 7 there is circled in green. And you can see the sandpit bunker next to it in the center of the picture. This view looks westwards towards Leytonstone. So how long has it been like that? That was another question I was seeking to answer. The oldest actual photograph that came up was intriguing. Filed in the Essex Records Office at Chelmsford, I came across a photograph by a noted local historian of the mid-century that was captioned in the index as the mulberry tree on Wanstead golf links. When I visited the reading room in Chelmsford, I was elated to find the original black and white print dated 1949, showing the tree standing on its own. Clearly, the tree was important enough and adequately known about for photographer toughs to have made this record. We're now going to see that photograph side by side with the existing mulberry. The view I'm going to show you is of both of them is looking westwards, backwards from where we're looking towards now. So looking westwards towards Redbridge. So Wanstead mulberry tree, 2019 and 1949. This is the same tree. The tree shapes have similarities in respect of the one high branch towards its right-hand side stretching upwards. Mulberries are nothing if not untidy in appearance. I actually found Mr. Tuff's handwriting to be the most thrilling part of this image, actually. I just loved that. It spoke to me, kind of thing, you know, more than the image did almost. And I was glad to have established the existence of the tree in solitude at this date. And I validated it by looking at wartime aerial photographs of the area. But remember what I said earlier, just a few minutes ago, that I was not to know that my tentative dating of the tree would be supported. And I couldn't have anticipated that. Well, this is what happened. One day in early September this year, I received a phone call from Wanstead Golf Club calling for help. They needed to know what to do because this had happened. During the heat wave, the mulberry had split open with one branch falling to the ground. Of course, I called on Peter Coles from Morris Londinium, and he called in David Alderman from the tree register of the British Isles. On a very wet day in September, we visited the tree. So here's the photograph, Dr. Peter Coles, David Alderman, examining the fallen mulberry tree with Wanstead Golf Club official there, and I'm standing there. Carl Weiss was there to take the photograph, as he has taken of many of the photographs in this session. And the outcome of this visit was that Wanstead Golf Club received from the experts written advice about how best to support the tree. And they were assured that this was not unusual and that the collapsed part of the tree will adopt a horizontal phase, probably rooting itself along the ground. They were happy to hear that at Wanstead. And I was happy to hear from the experts their opinion, looking at the tree and the inside of the tree as it's split inside, that it was indeed at least 300 years old. So yes, it could have been planted by the gardeners of Sir Josiah Child, his earlier Wanstead Hall, when he laid out the gardens that Richard Child then inherited for the Wanstead house. We're coming to the end of the presentation, and at this point, oh, by the way, on the right hand side of this slide is a photograph of Peter Coles's latest book. It's simply Mulberry, and if you want to know about anything about mulberries, that's the book to look at. It's scientific, learned and authoritative, and is fantastic. Covers history as well as botany and social factors. So that's a really great book, highly recommended. But I want to give sincere thanks to the following people for encouraging, arranging and facilitating this presentation. So David Boot, Maureen Measure, Robert Gay and Carl Weiss, and for generosity in sharing results and research and materials, Peter Ashen, Peter Coles of Morris Londinium, Marcus Shepherd and Stowe Film Lounge, Vestry House, of course, and the Essex Record Office. Vestry House has got the Buxton, Ellen Buxton's books, Friends of Wanstead Parklands, and the Wanstead Golf Club. But before we go, I just wanted to show you something that, what are we talking about? We're talking about mulberries. And here's some images of the fantastic, luscious and delicious sweet fruit that comes from the tree. one tree yields pounds and pounds of easily harvestable fruit. And mulberry trees make delicious jams and preserves. The only commercial operation in this country that I know about is the tip tree orchards in Essex, and maybe some of you know about this. I'm sure you do. You can buy these products in Waitrose, maybe elsewhere, subject to seasonality, but again, highly recommended. And lastly, I want to say, as we're now the festive season, so just to go on a jolly, I want to show you the mulberry fairy. Maybe you can recall, I mean, I'm old, and I don't suppose many of you are older than me, but Cicely Mary Barker's 1930s books, The Flower Fairies of the Garden. Now, you didn't have to be born in the 30s to know about that, because in our 50s and 60s childhoods, we were still looking at those books. But in Cicely Mary Barker's book, she has got a mulberry fairy. And here he is. And he's absolutely delightful, because I think, well, I certainly know, he's a boy fairy. So I think that's really appropriate for this really fantastic tree that's so untidy and lays down horizontally, but gets on with life and also produces fantastic things, and is the source of much enjoyment. So please do challenge my suppositions. You know, everything that I've said are just things that I've worked out and discussed with other people, and I do regard presenting to the History Society as somewhere where I can exchange views and perhaps get other opinions and suggestions, and I would welcome that, and also any questions. So thank you, David. That's the presentation finished.
Thank you, Claire. I don't think you could have started off our series of Zoom talks in a better way. I mean, the amount of research, painstaking research, but your nose for getting answers to your questions, and your presentation, that wonderful PowerPoint presentation. I just thought that was absolutely top notch. I don't think I can say any more. Anyway, would anybody like to ask a question?
Claire?
Yes.
Could you go back into your slides to the 4th slide, which was the map?
The 4th slide.
Which was the first time you showed the Morris Londinium map.
Hey. Back, wait a minute.
Escape.
Yeah. Right, I'll select it here before I go to the thing then. The 4th slide.
Which was the map. That's
that
the
one.
one.
Yes.
Yep. I'm just wondering, I think it seemed to me that where the mulberry tree was a bit to the right, that is a bit to the east of where the house would have been. I mean, I'm not suggesting you do it now, but you'd need to look at that other map that you showed, which showed the relationship of the house to the waterworks. But I think the Heronry Pond, even the west end of the Heronry Pond, is east of the house.
Yes, I think that may be right. The pinning of the green circles is done by somebody who is at Morris Londinium, so it may not be completely accurate.
Right.
It depends how it was described to them when it was first registered. The process that Morris Londinium offers is that if you've got a mulberry tree in your garden, you can just write to them and say, I've got a mulberry tree, and give the location, and they will just plonk it on the map there as a green circle, and you can send a photograph. So it's very much participant triggered, the location of these things. And more than once I've had to ask Peter Coles to move something. But yes, I think you're right. The one there at Leytonstone is probably a bit too far to the west, and I can certainly ask Peter to move that along more accurately. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's more a question that I was wondering whether it would fit into the location of the kitchen garden of Wanstead House. What I might do, because I grabbed a copy of I think it was City of London, is I've got a very detailed history of the gardens of Wanstead House by a lady called, I think, Sally Jeffrey. Have you come across that?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Right, then I don't need to mention it to you because you've seen it already.
Another technique, Robert, is to use the layering function of historical maps. And I did do that back in 2018, but perhaps it can be done again. So what if you go to the, I think it's a website in Scotland, somebody will remind me which it is, that offers a layering facility. So you tell them, you give them a base map from which to start, and then you ask them to put on top of it the place that you're interested in, so that you can reference where things exactly are, because of course historical maps are not necessarily accurate, and if you're pinpointing a tree, it's difficult. I've got a number of other photographs in the essays that I wrote, so I'm always after getting things more accurately, definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, after you.
Yes, National Library of Scotland. Peter Williams is saying National Library of Scotland is the map website that Claire is talking about. Basically, I think old Ordnance Survey maps that you can overlay with more recent ones.
National Library of Scotland. Yes, I've seen that. I think that's the one I was thinking of, Peter. Yeah.
Peter made an observation that he is an expert on Forest Gate, and he notes that the same kind of families appear in the history of Forest Gate and that area, as appeared in your talk this evening, Claire. That's the Fry family and the Gurners and all those.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know whether this can be kind of seen, but this is a family history image of the Buxtons, and it meant, you know, that there are names of Barclays and Gurneys, and other surnames, but they intermarried, and there's Elizabeth Fry as well. So it's a very interconnected family, and at the top is Thomas Fowle Buxton, who's the father of the grandfather of Ellen. So he's the predecessor of the liberator Buxton. He married Anna Hanbury. Now, Hanbury was the name, they were the brewers in Spitalfields. So that was the original marriage that linked up the Buxtons as a brewing family. And if you go to Leytonstone House, there are some, the small roads around the house and have got specific names that commemorate these people. So there is a Hanbury Road, and as well as a Buxton. And we know that we've got Buxton Roads and a Buxton School in the borough and in Leytonstone. So yes, I think that the family connections between the Frys, the Barclays, the Buxtons, and so on, would be very interesting to study, and probably it would be possible through ancestry or Find My Past or something like that, to construct more accurate relationships. and explore their various things. But my next investigation certainly is going to be Philip Sansom, because I haven't seen yet that he had a family connection to the Buxtons, but there must have been some connection for him to go and for him to be in that house, and then the Buxtons to go and live there, because they'd been going past that area on their way from London up to Norfolk. And also there were other big houses there with city business people as residents. So Cottons were there, Bank of England managers and so on. And there must have been a community of finance and business interests that will have been existing over 100, 150 years, maybe. But I'll settle with just finding out about Philip Sansom first, and I think I've got some quite interesting information to go on, because so much of the because of the position he was in, and because of the records of City of London have always been kept for centuries, really meticulously, and now have been digitized. That really provides so much material to investigate.
Thank you, Claire. I think Philip Sansom avenue of inquiry is just amazing. Jill Nichols asks about buying Peter Ashan's book. I got an email address for Peter. I don't yet know of any outlet. I had to email Peter to get a price from him, and he actually appeared on my doorstep with it in his hand. So if Jill reminds me to ask Peter to give arrangements to get the book to her with a price for it, I will pass on that inquiry, and anybody else's who wants Peter's book. It's very beautifully printed this time. This edition, latest edition, is a very beautiful piece of printing.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? And by all means, follow. If a thought occurs to you later, by all means, pursue it by email or phone.
I think Ina is waving.
Oh, Ina. Yeah, right. Yeah. Hello, Ina.
I just wanted to say what pure gold that talk was, Claire, and thanks also to the technical people. But Claire, it's my birthday. I couldn't have a better end to the evening. The research, the insights, your storytelling. And I've got those books. Several years ago, I was able to get those Buxton books, and I'm so happy. So thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I'm just delighted. I'm so pleased that it has come over as interesting, and I just get so much from talking to people about it. So it's really valuable for me to do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
You put my thoughts more better than I can, Ina. I'm proposing to close down the session unless somebody puts their hand up or intervenes. Last, I want to end with a thanks not just to Claire for what really is a fantastic talk, but also to Robert for making Leyton Leytonstone Historical Society part of the new Zoom generation. So we're catching up with other historical societies. I'm very grateful to Robert for all he's done for making it possible.
Happy birthday to Ina.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Jill. Thank you.
Okay. You're going to shut us off, Robert?
Yes, if you want.
Thank you, Robert. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good
Excellent.
to see
Very
you all.
much.
Bye-bye.
My privilege to be with you. Thank you.